And joining me now from Washington, D.C. for more on the death of Queen Elizabeth is President Emeritus, Corporate Council on Africa, Stephen Hayes. And we're going to focus on how much of how a death impacts on British relations with the rest of the world, especially Africa. Good to have you join us.
Thank you. It's good to see you again.
The death of Queen Elizabeth II has been described as the end of the Elizabethan era. And I want to ask you what your understanding of that is, and if that would redefine, if we're going to see a redefining of British relations with the rest of the world, even though she was just a constitutional head of state.
Well, I don't think it will change the relationships between the United States and Britain, and I think probably for most of the world it will remain the same. Certainly it's an end of an age. For people like myself, in fact, the very first program I ever saw on television was the coronation of the Queen in 1953. So she's a marker for the lives of many around the world, about 80%, I think, of the people living now. So I think it's an important area. It's something that we've all marked our lives by. But as far as changing the issues around the world for Britain or for the United States and the British relationship, I don't anticipate a significant change. Certainly, Charles has had 70 years to prepare for this, 73, I suppose. But so I think things will remain very, very close. I think the nature of relationships between Africa and the United Kingdom may change some. I think that the advantage of a constitutional monarchy is that the Queen and now the King represents a unifying factor. And I think looking what's happening in the world today, there's reasons for a strong unifying factor. Now, whether Charles can remain that way, we'll see.
And if you've also been following the news of her death, you will realize that it is sort of generating mixed reaction. There are those who have celebrated her as an iconic figure and one who led her country through very difficult times. But amidst that, you also see that it is reviving the criticisms around Britain's legacy of colonialism. And I just wanted to ask you why it is important that we make space for that part of history as we talk about her.
Well, I think the history of Africa is inseparable from the monarchy and the British monarchy. Certainly, it's very, very important. The history is, in many ways, a tragic history between the United Kingdom and Great Britain and African countries, certainly Nigeria too. And so you can't simply celebrate the life and honor the life without forgetting the legacy that represented. She, I think, never made really clear her own opinion on colonization. She was a unifying factor. Her whole purpose was to unify the Great Britain, and therefore she would not criticize. I would have hoped that she would have been more critical, but then I think that would have broken the unification of Great Britain. So her first priority in her mind, I think, was to the country and not necessarily to the colonies.
What about the transition from colonialism to independence and then to Commonwealth? Does that sort of do anything to alleviate or anything to sort of relieve her from any of these criticisms we've seen so far? Or does it just even make things work? Because some people are wondering, who is the Commonwealth for in the first place?
Well, the Commonwealth was primarily for the United Kingdom. I think that's not so much a criticism as an observation. The thing is that history will probably note that independence came during her time, but again, I think the crown had less to do with it than the general world times and Parliament's views as well. But history, in terms of noting ages, will, I think, be complementary to her that independence and African independence did develop. Whether the Commonwealth stays together is another issue as well. understand a couple of countries, including Togo, have come into the Commonwealth, but there are other countries that are saying it's time to leave the Commonwealth. So I think a lot of it will be how well the relationship with Great Britain is managed by not only the Foreign Secretary, I should say, and Parliament, but also by how well King Charles presents himself.
And I want to get to King Charles in a moment, especially because he doesn't enjoy as much popularity as a king did, as a queen did rather. But I want to talk about, because you mentioned the agitations to leave the Commonwealth, and I know that, for example, Australia is now rethinking the Queen as head of state. Antigua and Barbuda are also following in the same direction. Quite all right, African countries are majorly a republic and do not have the Queen as head of state. But in terms of the Commonwealth, do you think that the Commonwealth is going to stay undivided, and that African countries, or perhaps African countries, will renegotiate the agreement of the Commonwealth?
I think it's going to be very difficult to keep the Commonwealth together, frankly. I mean, particularly if Australia leaves and Antigua and Barbuda leave as well. I think there's going to be a lot more discussion in the Commonwealth countries as whether they should leave as well. On the other hand, there is a certain psychological advantage, I should say, to a large group of countries working together or being part of one unit, such as the Commonwealth. But I think the pressures are going to be far greater now on the Commonwealth. Certainly, they honored Queen Elizabeth because of her, I think in part because of her long tenure and her not creating creating a fuss about by not giving any of her opinions. That's going to be very hard for Charles to control himself, but I think he will. But I think that, again, the pressures on the Commonwealth now will be far greater than they ever were.
And I want to ask whether you think, I think you already touched on it, but let me just ask further. If you think that King Charles can provide the stability, he's the head of Commonwealth. If he can provide the stability and leadership that the Commonwealth needs now, especially because of the direction that countries like Australia and Antigua Barbuda are heading.
I think he will do better than most people anticipate. But again, you've had 70 years of goodwill from the Queen. So there's an advantage to Charles, but there's also the disadvantage of being compared to that 70 years, which is an impossible comparison. So I think he's got a difficult road ahead. I think he can do it, but we'll just have to wait and see.
And I'm sure conversations are on already, because I think he has had a meeting with the Secretary General of the Commonwealth, Patricia Scotland, and we'll see how things play out going on in his reign. Thank you so much for talking to us. The President Emeritus, Corporate Council on Africa, Stephen Hayes.
Thank you again. It's an honor.